Where you going there, Chief?
See if I can turn this.
Thank you for everyone for coming out tonight. We're very excited to have you here. And I just heard Fred just pulled into the parking lot, so we are good to go. He ran into a little bit of traffic by the bridge as he was coming up this way. So he will be in just a moment. But as we start all of our programming here, we begin all of it with the Pledge of Allegiance. For those of you that are able, please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Sorry, this happened last week too. So I guess I'm going to talk to you from the back of the room for a second. I don't need the slides to tell you about all the wonderful things that I will tell you about. The USS Silversides is always very happy to do these types of lectures because part of our mission is to honor the veteran. And we do that through education and preservation. For those of you that have been around here for a long time, you can see what we do to preserve. We use our vessels as teaching tools to understand, help people understand what the veteran went through, because it's very hard to give honor to something that you don't know anything about. And a lot of people know nothing about the sacrifices made by the men and women of the military in order to preserve the freedoms that they have. And so we are very excited to be able to do this. And as part of that, our lecture series is part of our educational programming here, as well as our STEM programs that we have for children. The STEM programs that we have are a way to engage a young person, because a lot of times when you see a young person and they come here on a field trip, they may be initially geeked and then they get there, it's like, oh, another history museum, something boring. But then if you can get them actively engaged in something, and one of the STEM programs we run is called SubTech, or Submersible Remotely Operated Vehicles. And we get them involved in what actually mimics going on in the Submersible Remotely Operated Vehicle class. We actually have them build a submersible, and it mimics everything that the submarine does. And suddenly, when they get out in that sub, it's no longer, oh, another boring thing I gotta look at. It's like, these guys couldn't see, there's no windows. Or when you talk about how air pressure works on the torpedoes, or how they had to stay underwater for so long, and so how are they supposed to see with no windows, and you introduce the concept of a periscope. Suddenly, it's no longer, oh, another boring museum I gotta go to. It's like, wow, this is cool. And then we start telling the stories about the people that served and what their sacrifices are. And suddenly you've got them engaged, and suddenly they're interested and they have the respect for it. One time when we had an exhibit up, it was on Navy divers. And my office at that point used to be right behind the wall where there was this video playing of how do you dress a diver. And it takes like 30 minutes to get him dressed from head to toe. And so there's this little boy there, and I think it was his mother, caregiver, I don't know. And he's like, wow, how do they eat down there? Watch the video. How do they go to the bathroom down there? Watch the video. How did they? And then the little boy asked, well, why is he down there? And the woman that was with said, it's maybe there's a sailor down there that needs his help. And the little guy goes, well, then he's a hero. And I'm going, yes, he did it. That's the whole point, is that unless someone is exposed to something, they know nothing about it. And so that's what we try and do here. And we do that here with the help of a lot of different sponsors. And tonight we have an extra special sponsor of the Marine Corps League, who has been kind enough to make a very generous donation to the museum, and they're actually sponsoring this lecture. So if everyone could take a moment and give a round of applause to the Marine Corps League, we truly appreciate it. In addition to the Marine Corps League, we have our sponsors of the Birch Foundation out of Holland, Michigan, who are always wonderful in helping us make sure that we preserve history and that we can continue to educate people, because they believe that education is the key way to get people to go into public service, because they felt that public service was something that was so important in everyone's life. And tonight's, our additional sponsors, the Marine Corps League, who we're very happy to have here tonight and very excited. And then our media sponsor is Blue Lake Public Radio. And as all of you know that come here on a frequent basis, we do not receive any state, federal, or local funding. Our whole museum is run through the wonderful, generous donations of our community and supporters to make it all possible and happen. Also with admissions and gift store sales. Our lecture series tonight is on Vietnam. We've had many exciting lectures on it thus far this year, and we're very happy to be continuing. We've done it a little differently this year as we have in other lectures. We didn't do it chronologically, but we did it by branch of the service. And tonight we're very lucky to be having Fred Johnson talk about the Marines in Vietnam. Next week's speaker is Laura Orr. She will be joining us via Zoom into the theater as well as at home if anyone wishes to watch from home. She at this point is unable to join us in person, but she has written and worked with the Hampton Roads Naval Museum, where she's currently the Director of Education. She has a very distinguished background in creating exhibits. For any of you that have been here on frequent basis, we've been handing out a book to any Navy veteran that they wrote about the 10,000-day war, the Navy in Vietnam. And any of you that come next week, there'll be a copy here for you as well. Tonight's speaker is Fred Johnson, whom we all know very well. He is one of the favorites of the museum, and we're very excited that he'll be here just momentarily. After the October 25th in the Navy in Vietnam, which I said will be held via Zoom into the auditorium, or you can watch it from home. On November 1st, we'll have 2 Silver Star awardees from Vietnam here in person at the museum, and they will be talking about their time in the Medical Corps in Vietnam. Then on November 8th, we will have Ron Janowski will be in to talk about the home front. Because as anyone knows that studies anything to do with Vietnam, the home front played a very important role in how the government decided to wage the war. And the things that they happened at the home front had a profound impact on every person that served in the military at that point. And he'll be talking about that from the perspective of how it affected our Vietnam veterans. Then on November 15th, hard to imagine, we're already almost a month away from the end of the series, we'll have the outcomes from Vietnam and what Vietnam did to change the way that the United States wages war and continues in that regard. Now, while Fred gets himself together and gets situated, is there any questions that I can answer from anyone about the series or about the museum or anything like that? You guys all know it so well.
How many young people do you have visit the museum and tour the submarine? Any guess on that?
Well, we get about 45,000 visitors a year. And out of that 45,000, I would say most are families in the summer that we get, and most families have a minimum of 2 to 3 children. So at least 15,000. And then we get field trips from school age groups. 2 weeks ago, we had 9 field trips in 1 week from one school in East Lansing. And they had about 40 kids in each group, so that was about 360 in 1 week. And what we do when they come, we have a program that's called Sub for Kids, and we give them a PowerPoint tour of the vessel. We have them do the physical fitness things that they would have needed to be a submariner at that point. We start talking about the Turtle, which was the first American submarine that goes back to the Revolutionary War, and we talk to them about all of that. And then we talk to them about what the Hunley was like, what it was like to live in the Hunley, and what it was like to be part of the Civil War, and anything else that they need to know. And then we bring them into the modern age, and we tell them everything that they need to know to become a submariner. And so we do that. And we enjoy. We also have our overnight encampment program. And we are starting to see our scouts come back again, which is wonderful, because that's a major part of our income that we have in order to continue our business. Do you have any other questions?
Have you ever toured to Hunley?
No, I have never toured the Hunley, because I don't think anyone can actually tour. You can see it from the outside, but I don't think you can actually get in the inside of it.
Well, you know they found it.
Yes, they found it, and it's still encased in water.
Yep.
It's still encased in water, so I've never actually been on the inside of it, as opposed to on the outside of it. But they're still doing these cool things with electrolysis to be able to clean her up, but I think if they ever took her out of water at this point, she would disintegrate. And so, I can't wait until...
Interesting story.
It's a very interesting story.
Three-time loser.
Well, you know what? You have to go and you have to get it all started up at some point. And you look at the evolution of submarines. One of the stories that I like to tell around St. Patrick's Day is that the first modern submarine was created by an Irish immigrant to the United States. And the short history of that is that when he left Ireland because the English were not, they didn't like the Catholics very much, and they prohibited most people from doing a lot of things if you were Catholic. And so he was working for the Christian Brothers, teaching, but he was also a tinkerer. He always was building things, and he had all these great ideas, just like many of the men of his generation. And so when he came to America, he took a job with Christian Brothers teaching, and in the evening, he decided that he would design a first functioning submarine, and he did. But it was paid for by the Fenian Ram, which was a group of Irish people that were anti-English, and they were to purchase it from him. Well, they ran into a little bit of disagreement, and they stole the submarine and they sank it. And so he went on to continue building submarines, and he got the ultimate revenge. The country that bought most of his submarines was England, and he made a fortune off of them, selling his submarine that was meant to destroy them first, and then. So that's one of the stories we like to tell around St. Patrick's Day, about how we got our first modern submarine. Yes, the Hunley, yes, was there. Yeah. So, as Fred is getting ready here, putting his slides up, we'll be ready to start in a moment. Does anyone else have any other questions? Anyone, any interesting submarine stories? Yeah.
You don't want to hear them guys.
For those of you at home on Zoom, I will ask at this time that you quiet your microphones, and that way then you can begin to listen to our lecture. And I think I know your problem, why you lost your microphone.
That's typical Wrangler, isn't it? Hurry up and wait.
Isn't that all service?
Yep. Yeah, I can't believe it has to be that way.
I can pull that up for you. Don't mean to be sharp. I will plug back in this. Yep, we'll plug it back in for you. Actually, no, I'm sorry, I need a video camera, so you just tell me when to advance the slide.
So I'm in the back there, we do.
Because I have to have the video camera back on.
No, I don't think so.
But I will advance your slide for you. Okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Apologies. I was just not aware of the road construction going on in Grand Haven, here in Holland. Thank you all for coming out. for this session on the U.S. Marines in Vietnam. First of all, for all of our Vietnam veterans in the room, thank you guys so much. Every time I do any kind of research that involves the Vietnam veterans, of course, all of our veterans are dear and close to my heart. Anytime I'm doing research about Vietnam, I'm just reminded one more time about how much of a debt of gratitude we owe to anybody who served in Vietnam from 1954 to 75 when the whole thing just finally ended. So thank you very much. Moving right along.
Sorry, 1 second. Just need to make sure the camera's up so that everyone can see. There we go. There we go. Now our people at home can see the presentation.
Great.
And that is Cliff, and Cliff is going to go join us down at the bottom right. And Fred, I'm going to ask you if you could either speak up or use the mic so
Sure.
that we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead and get started. The Marine Corps in Vietnam. There are a number of different battle maps showing the Vietnam War, and I always go back and forth. I can't easily decide which one I like most. This is probably my second most used one when I'm teaching about this. But you see all the way up to the north there, almost toward the Chinese border, you see Dien Bien Phu. That's where the French were beat in 1954, which pretty much changed the entire dynamic. What was going on, what was called the French Indochina War, not the Vietnam War, but the French Indochina War. The French were thrown out of there when they were basically just routed and had to give up their colonial ambitions in Vietnam, and that's what actually brought the United States into the conflict. Okay. If you've ever been to, how many of you have seen the Iwo Jima Memorial? Impressive, isn't it? If you go there and you look at it at any time of day, it's based on that awesome photo by Joe Rosenthal taken on February 23rd, 1945, when the Marines were hoisting the flag or raising the flag on Mount Suribachi in that climactic battle called the Battle of Iwo Jima. If you look at the resolve on those Marines' faces, and of course one of them was Ira Hayes, a Pima Indian, who was with them and all that. I mean, these guys just seem to, Joe Rosenthal and the sculptor captured what was going on there so wonderfully. And the spirit that those Marines have was just the same thing that we see in Marines who served in Operation Desert Storm. Well, Marines, and of course, Air Force, Navy, Army personnel deployed to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait in the early 1990s, and then the most recent conflict with Marines, Army, Navy, Air Force personnel in Afghanistan. What we've got here then is a tradition, a movement of Marines across history, all different kind of conflicts that have a tradition of service and heroism. Let's start right here. August 2nd, 1964. USS Maddox reported, or it was reported that there was an attack by the Vietnamese Navy against the USS Maddox. In response to that, on August 7th, 1964, the Congress passed something called the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution because USS Maddox had been on patrol in the Gulf of Tonkin off the coast of Vietnam before then. I'm only going to read from the red. You know, it's a very legalistic document, a lot of congressional ease, but the main parts are: naval units of the communist regime in Vietnam have deliberately and repeatedly attacked the United States naval vessels lawfully present in international waters and have thereby created a serious threat to international peace. These attackers are part of a deliberate and systematic campaign of aggression that the communist regime in North Vietnam has been waging against its neighbors, and the nations join with them in the collective defense of their freedom. The United States is assisting the peoples of Southeast Asia to protect their freedom, and has no territorial, military, or political ambitions in that area. This, by the way, I don't want to leave from this too soon. This was, in fact, one of the problems that led to the stagnation that occurred in Vietnam eventually. But desires only that these people should be left in peace to work out their destinies in their own way. Who can't support a mission like that? And so, it was resolved by the Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America, in Congress assembled, that the Congress approves and supports the determination of the President as Commander-in-Chief to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against the forces of the United States and to prevent further aggression. This all sounds great until you ask the question, what does take all necessary measures mean? What does that involve? How long does it go on? Is there an expiration date? Does it involve air, sea, land? Does it mean everything? Because what we have to understand is that while Vietnam is beginning, American foreign policy from Korea into Vietnam was going through a major change where the traditional reasons for America going to war have been altered starkly by 1947, when President Harry Truman, in the Greek crisis, announced to the world that America was going to would give financial, military, and economic aid to any nation fighting against communist aggression. Now, traditionally, as in the case of World War II, America would go to war and fight only if the nation directly were threatened. That was simple enough. You hit Pearl Harbor on December 7th, Hitler declared war on December 11th, 4 days later. It was pretty simple. No commander-in-chief worth his or her salt was going to stand by and let battleships at the bottom of the harbor in Pearl Harbor just go unanswered. So that was pretty cut and dry. But what does it mean when a nation is in trouble and you're going to commit economic, military, and political help to them? What do the boundary lines mean? What's the political geography of that? So what it meant was that America in the Cold War was launching out into a brand new venture where we did not have to be attacked directly in order for us to get involved in the conflict. That was Korea, that's Vietnam. Our national interest, so it was said, expanded well beyond American shores. Lyndon Johnson was the President of the United States when the troop buildup in Vietnam really began to gather momentum. You all are aware, of course, of the fact that on November 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Texas, and his vice president was sworn in immediately that day. And Lyndon Johnson made it his personal mission to emulate his mentor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had the Great Depression, had World War II. He was known as a World War II president. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the one that defeated Nazism or got credit for defeating Nazism, got credit for defeating Japanese militarism, got credit for defeating Italian fascism. Likewise, he wanted to follow the example of his mentor. And for him, the new bully on the block was communism. And we need to also remember, as I mentioned to you all, those of you who were here during the session when we opened up this series on Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, all of these men had lived through a period of the 1930s when Hitler rose to power, when Mussolini rose to power, when the Japanese militarists rose to power. They had lived through the period of appeasement where international bullies had threatened to go to war and people hoped that they wouldn't, and accommodated them and gave them everything they want, in Hitler's case, more and more land, and they ended up going to war anyway and losing more people. So the lesson for that generation was you can fight them sooner or later, but you're going to end up fighting them. So the decision after World War II was, well, fight them sooner. No more waiting. Lyndon Johnson had been affected by that. So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution passed, and then in March 1965, Marines landed in Vietnam, as you can see here from this headline from the Chicago Tribune. This one from the San Francisco Sunday Chronicle, March 7th or 8th, 1965. Next one. And this one I believe from Delaware, just to give us an idea of the spread across the country of how this was being attacked. And the Marines landed at Da Nang Air Base. Da Nang was a forward location area, a major supply center. I think before the war was over, they would have about 500,000 people stationed at just Da Nang. Okay? So on March 8, 1965, the 3rd Battalion of the 9th Marine Regiment landed ashore in a staged amphibious operation. And a la World War II style, although this was not World War II, obviously, the Marines came ashore in what looked like those World War II kind of landing craft. Knowing the Marine Corps, they probably were World War II landing craft. For those of you who are in the Marine Corps, you know that the Marines take great pride in being able to do a lot of stuff with old equipment. They are the cheapest of the services. Now, this is what the Marines call an unopposed landing, and it was staged, and there were a lot of cameras on the beach, and it was there though, but it was there to send a signal to the world that America was committing ground forces to the Vietnam conflict. It took them about a day to get into position, get everybody ashore, get all the equipment ashore, and of course they had the human beings with their packs on their back. They had heavy equipment as well, and of course tanks. They came ashore. This is the old M60 tank. So there they were. Da Nang Air Base was a sprawling complex. And as I mentioned, it'll have about 500,000 people there. You see some F-100 Super Sabres there on the tarmac, some fighter jets, supply depot, all kind of things. Now, just for a moment here, you see here, this is from a National Public Radio report where the article is entitled, "In Da Nang, where U.S. troops first landed." These Marines, these guys here, and here, were Marines who landed on March 8, 1965. They come back, like a lot of veterans have done. They've gone back to Vietnam, and some of them have even found North Vietnamese people that they knew, or people they have become acquainted with since then. But this guy right here, Nguyen Tin, he said that he saw the Marines landing that day. He was a former Viet Cong. He said, "When I saw the Americans arrive, I knew the war was about to get harder. It was going to be more ferocious, and it was going to last a lot longer. A lot more people were going to die, and if we weren't very determined, we weren't going to win." That gives you an idea of the kind of overwhelming force that the Americans projected, or the feeling that people had when they saw these Americans coming ashore. Eventually, I tell my students that just the way they have come to know things, words like Fallujah and Kabul, and words like that, for the Vietnam generation, for when we were growing up, names like Bien Hoa, Saigon, Kon Tum, Pleiku, these were the names that we heard about in the news every night. For the Marines, there were more than this. There was a lot more than this. I left the H out here, but Chu Lai, Phu Bai, Hue, Dong Ha, Tonkin, Van Thuong, and more. Marines were fighting in these places. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give some idea of what the Marines were doing in Vietnam from 1965 until the pullout in 1975. On August 17, 1965, a Viet Cong deserter told American forces, American officials, that an attack was being planned for a U.S. Marine stationed at Chu Lai. So the Americans launched an operation called Operation Starlight. It was the first major battle of the Vietnam War. And the United States scored a resounding victory, meaning that there was no doubt that we won. Now, that was 1965. By 1966, there were nearly 70,000 Marines in Vietnam, and Marines were, at that point, the mission was to carry out large-scale ground operations against the Viet Cong. I say the Viet Cong because there's a difference between the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese Army regulars. The North Vietnamese Army regulars, they could vary from being very poorly trained troops to very highly skilled and effective professionals. Along with the ground combat, Marines were providing air support from helicopter squadron and fixed-wing aircraft striking targets in South and North Vietnam. So what you've got is what, at least when I was going through TBS, they call something called the MAGTF, the Marine Corps Air Ground Task Force. Now, a lot of what I was taught in the basic school were the things that Marines had learned from as a result of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Don't forget, by the time Vietnam is that war where the helicopter in particular, just like World War II became the war where airplanes became pretty much a standardized means of doing warfare, Vietnam became the conflict where the helicopter was not only just making its debut, but became that vehicle you could not do war without. Vietnam proved that, just like some people have said when it comes to making modern warfare, you can't win a war with air power alone, but you're not going to win a war without air power. Does that make sense? So we were told in boot camp that you can bomb it, smoke it, gas it, nuke it, flame it, but until you have a Marine standing on it, it's not yours. By 1967, Army leadership in Saigon advocated for Marines to start concentrating on doing search and destroy operations. The Marines' mission was split into two areas: fight against the North Vietnamese along the DMZ, or what was known as a demilitarized zone, toward the north, and two, to conduct counterinsurgency operations waged against the Viet Cong in the villages in the south. You see what's going on? You've already got a bifurcated war against the regular forces and another force, an amorphous force, a ghost force called the Viet Cong. People who blend into the night, people who look like civilians, people who may or may not have your back. But then comes the question. I wanted to do more with you all than just tell you about where the Marines were, what the battles were, the kind of weapons they used. In fact, we won't talk about weapons at all. I was more interested, and I thought you might be more interested in finding out who were these people, who were these young men, who were these young women who deployed to Vietnam and did the hard work of fighting a war that, as by the time you get to 1968, especially by the time you get to 1968, very many people are questioning our presence there. Why are we there? Should we be there? And most of all, what's the mission? Marines don't live for, if Marines don't live for anything else, they live to know what is the mission. They'll accomplish the mission, but you got to tell them the mission. And there's different ways that Marines like to be told the mission. For example, to answer the question, who were they? On March 30th, 1967, one individual in particular, answering the question, who were they, was engaged in something called the Battle of Gatlin's Corner. This is General Richard I. Butch Neal, who was my commanding officer at Camp Lejeune when I was stationed there as the communications officer at 5th Battalion, 10th Marines. He went on to be the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. He's a Silver Star winner, a Vietnam veteran. That's him as a young college student, and him now as a retired 4-star general. His book, What Now, Lieutenant, which if you're interested in reading such things, I recommend it because it's a very easy read and a very good read. In his book, What Now, Lieutenant, he says some of the following. He shares the following. Of course, he was at the time an FO, which means a forward observer. For artillery units, but primarily for infantry units. An infantry unit will oftentimes, to get artillery calls or artillery missions, they'll have somebody from an artillery battery, in other words, a trained artillery officer who knows how to call what they call call for fire, to be radio in. So they'll be assigned to an infantry unit, and when the platoon commander or company commander needs an artillery mission, that's the guy they calls in the mission. That's what Colonel Neal, or rather General Neal, was doing as a young lieutenant. If they're calling for an airstrike, they'll have somebody from the air wing who will call it an airstrike. In other words, the person that knows how to speak the lingo of the Air Force or the Marine Air Wing, or somebody that knows how to speak the lingo of a Marine Artillery Battalion and firing battery. So on this particular day, Lieutenant Neal is assigned to an infantry unit as the forward observer. He's the guy speaking that artillery ease. And then, a little bit ahead of ourselves, he'll go on, that's correct, Peg. The General Neal, he'll go on to be the chief communications officer for the first Iraq War. I just wanted to go ahead and put that in so you know that he did have more than a shelf life of Vietnam. General Neal wrote in his book, India Company 3rd Battalion of the 9th Marines was digging in for the night on top of Hill 70. Hill 70 was 2 miles south of the DMZ, that is the demilitarized zone in Quang Tri Province. There were approximately 200 Marines on Hill 70. Unknown to them, though, there were 500 to 800 North Marines, 800 North Vietnamese soldiers just below. They were in the grass, waiting for the moment to attack. Once they got close enough, the communist troops struck with heavy machine guns and mortars. During the battle, 15 Marines were killed, including the company commander, Captain Michael P. Gatlin, shown right here. Also killed was the leader of 2nd Platoon, 2nd Lieutenant John P. Bobo, and Corporal John L. Laurinaitis. All three were killed while covering the withdrawal of their comrades. Gatlin and Laurinaitis posthumously received the Navy Cross, and Lieutenant Bobo earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. This is Lieutenant Bobo right here, killed in action, posthumous Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Colonel Neal, or rather at the time, Lieutenant Neal, being the senior officer in the field now, and not being an infantry officer, but yet he's the ranking officer out there, he assumed the command of the unit. He said, "This was the first time in my life that I realized I was not invincible. Literally overnight, I went from a cocky, carefree lieutenant to one who understood the power and responsibility of leadership and command. It was daunting. Any fears I had over being the one in charge were overcome by the urgency of the situation, and fortunately, I was able to do what I had been trained to do," which again speaks to Marine Corps training. With the death of Captain Gatlin, I now took command of India 3-9. Upon reflection, I might have thought I wasn't up to the task, but my training at TBS, the basic school, and my time as an FO forward observer for both Captain Pyle and Captain Gatlin had prepared me for just such an eventuality. I may not have been consciously aware of that training, but it was a resource I was able to call upon when needed. Marines in training go through exercises over and over and over again ad nauseum until the point you're able to sit up and clean your weapon with your eyes closed, or at night you can learn to do a thing, you learn to march and make maneuvers at the snap of a command until it becomes second reflex. And they do that so that just in these kind of situations, you don't have to think about what to do. You simply have been trained to know what to do. At this time, the full weight of what had occurred settled on me. Not only was I trying to process the fact that of the 7 lieutenants and captains in the field during the battle, only 3 of us walked out, I was also deeply troubled by and unable to reconcile the randomness of war. Why had some men lost their lives while some had merely been wounded, or like me, sustained no significant wounds except for some shrapnel in my fingers, which I removed myself? General Neal went on to say, "It said there are no atheists in foxholes, and I found that to be as true as it could be. Due to the horror we experienced, there was no shortage of exhortations to a higher being. The Battle of Gatlin's Corner did not rattle my faith, but it sure did test it." This battle, otherwise not known by the general press or many people in America, is one of many, many battles that Marines fought during the Vietnam conflict, where American soldiers, American military people performed with excellence, with bravery, with camaraderie, with duty and dedication, irrespective of what we were being told about the drug-addled soldiers and personnel who were out there in the field. And I'm not denying that they were there, but there was another side to the story. And during boot camp, we were always told that when it came to close quarter combat, one-on-one, any American soldier or Marine was as good as or better than usually their North Vietnamese counterpart. They were all motivated by a desire to accomplish the mission. Wherever Marines were in Vietnam, they wanted to accomplish the mission. And as I alluded to earlier, Marines are taught to accomplish the mission in a number of different ways. Usually through something called a 5-paragraph order. Anybody remember this? SMEAC, situation, mission, execution, admin logistics. This is how you plan for a battle. This is how you plan for an operation. Then there's another one. BAMSIS, an acronym which means the following: begin the planning, arrange for recon, make the recon, complete the planning, issue the order, supervise. I have found you can apply this in any area of life: raising children, teaching students, training a dog, getting through traffic in Muskegon, anything. Or rather, Grand Haven, anything. A big test for the Marine Corps came in January 1968. Anybody who served in Vietnam, anybody who was alive during that period will never forget. If they were paying attention, you will not forget January 1968, the Tet Offensive. In January 68, particularly in the middle of the month, General Vo Nguyen Giap, I don't think very many people realize, but by this point in the war, Ho Chi Minh was in charge, but more or less as a figurehead. There was a person named Lee Duc Tho who actually was a political head of what was going on, but the military driver behind a lot of stuff that happened was General Giap, a true military genius in his own right in Vietnam. His plan was to launch an attack against American and South Vietnamese forces, the ARVNs, or the Army of the Republic of Vietnam is what they called them. Launch an attack and during the new year and strike several places all at once. If you strike several places all at once, then even though you have fire bases in different places and Pleiku and so on and so forth, if you hit them all at once, then it would seem like you're getting a mass invasion. Think of, let me draw an American example. So what happened at the Battle of Chancellorsville in the spring of 1863, when General Stonewall Jackson was ordered by General Robert E. Lee to break off his force and hit the Union Army here, hit them here, hit them here, hit them here. He had a numerically inferior force, but because they were being attacked everywhere at once, they thought they'd been surrounded. This is what General Giap wanted to do, to get the American and South Vietnamese forces off balance, and then when they were off balance enough, to give them the final blow. What eventually happened was that as part of the Tet Offensive, on January 21st, 1968, the North Vietnamese Army launched an assault, an artillery barrage against Khe Sanh. You have to love Marine Corps humor right here, right? Money orders at this time, stamps at this time. What happened at Khe Sanh would end up going down in Marine Corps history, Marine Corps lore, Marine Corps legend as one of the great battles, certainly one of the more trying battles, one of the more trying situations that Marines have found themselves in, and Marines have always found themselves in trying situations. The pictures speak for themselves. Caution, being a Marine in Khe Sanh may be hazardous to your health. 3rd Battalion, 26 Marines. Marines out on patrol here. Khe Sanh may be hazardous to your health. Now, when President Johnson found out what was going on at Khe Sanh, he gave orders to the commanders in the field saying that Khe Sanh must be held at all costs. It was critical to what they were trying to do in that theater of the war. So the Marines dug in. Many people at the time compared it to another situation where Marines had been surrounded at another time at a place called Chosin Reservoir during the Korean conflict. You see the dates up there. It says November 26th through December 13th, 1950. Nobody really thought the Americans were going to be in Korea that long, but the Chinese had come in on the side of the North Koreans earlier that year, and then they encircled them at the Chosin Reservoir. And not to get too diverted here, but there's a few pictures here showing where the Marines were. Marines were in the tropics in Vietnam. In Chosin, a completely different story. It was cold. Bitter, freezing cold. One of the worst, coldest winters on record in Korea at that point. One Marine named General Louis Burwell Chesty Puller found out where the enemy was, and he said, "We've been looking for the enemy several days now. We finally found them. We're surrounded. That simplifies our problem, finding these people and killing them." It would be well to also tell you that Chesty Puller was the winner of 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Navy Crosses. There was no higher honor of valor that you can get for combat heroism in the naval services in the Marine Corps than the Navy Cross. I always wonder, why didn't he get the Congressional Medal? I mean, what does a man got to do? 4 Navy Crosses? He should at least qualify by number 2.5, right? The Marines were told to hold on, and they did hold on. Quezon ended up being a 77-day siege. And the thing that made it so not just eye-poppingly interesting and capturing the attention of the military and the president and the public was that, similar to what happened at Dien Bien Phu, the North Vietnamese were lobbing in artillery shells almost unimpeded. It was the air support, the wonderful air support by the U.S. Air Force, and helicopter support keeping NVA regulars pinned down that allowed these Marines to hold out for 77 days, 2 months and then some. From the Marines themselves, there are different Marines who wrote home. There's a book entitled Letters from Vietnam, where I've gone through and extracted some of the letters from the Marines who are writing back home to their parents, to their loved ones. One person who was a very prominent Marine, who ended up being a very prominent German journalist after the war, was Philip Caputo. Now, Philip Caputo was a guy from Illinois who went through OCS in Quantico. He went through TBS in Quantico, like all Marine officers will. I don't know of anybody that becomes a Marine Corps officer, even if you're coming from the Naval Academy or NROTC, you go through Quantico for the basic school. And basically, the basic school is a finishing school where the Marine Corps will introduce you to every MOS, that is every military occupational specialty they have available, so that you get a taste of what's available, what you want to do, and then you fill out a dream sheet. And it is a dream sheet because they tell you what you're going to do, or what you like to do, your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. And then, if you're fortunate enough to get your first choice, then that's what you'll get. Philip Caputo writes in his book, A Rumor of War, which is a long commentary about the conflict, that coming from Illinois, and they're running through the woods of Northern Virginia, where Quantico is, he said they thought they were really practicing for the real thing. He says in his book that, he grew up in the 1940s, 50s, where movies like Sands of Iwo Jima, with John Wayne's playing Sergeant John Stryker, landing on the beaches of Iwo Jima and so forth. The last good war, the Marines being heroes, and then the very romantic music in the background. That's how they were raised. And that's what he expected to confront, to experience. And he didn't expect it to be a movie, but they were so naive, he was saying in the book, about his generation. That's a picture of Phil Caputo. One author, one particular blogger commented upon Caputo's book, and again, if you have not read this is a book worth reading. He called it a personal odyssey of real-life experience as a Marine in Vietnam. He used the story, that is, Caputo used the story of his moral and physical transformation as a metaphor for this damaging war. And Caputo really does transform, he does change, evolve in different ways throughout the telling of this memoir. At one point, Caputo writes this: "The heroic experience I sought was war. War was the ultimate adventure, war the ordinary man's most convenient means of escaping the ordinary. The country was at peace then, but the early 60s were years of almost constant tension and crisis. If a conflict did break out, the Marines would be certain to fight in it, and I could be there with them, actually there. Not watching it on a movie or TV screen, not reading about it in a book, but there, living out a fantasy. Already I saw myself charging up some distant beachhead, like John Wayne in Sands of Iwo Jima, and then coming home a suntanned warrior with medals on my chest." Caputo says, "A man needs many things in war, but a strong imagination is not one of them. In Vietnam, the best soldiers were usually unimaginative men who did not feel afraid until there was obvious reason. But the rest of us suffered from constant expectancy, feeling that something was about to happen, waiting for it to happen, wishing it would happen, just so the tension would be relieved." All right, one of you mentioned, before we got started, the phrase, "hurry up and wait." Absolutely right. There's a common understanding in the military. Walk for 10 minutes, stop for five, while the point checks out a suspicious looking area, drop down and watch the flanks, get up and walk some more, stop again. Now what? What the hell is going on up there at the point? Drop down, face outboard, watch the flanks, get up, walk again. stumble down into the gully, get up on the other side, slipping in the mud. Don't bunch up. The squad and fire team leaders caution. Come on, people, don't bunch up. Keep your interval, hold it, get down, watch the flanks, move out, walk, stop, walk, and the sun is growing hotter by the minute. I can't imagine what it must have been like to be on patrol like that, and then having to carry a radio on your back, the platoon commander giving arm and hand signals, advancing forward, stop for a second, defilade left, defilade right, all these kind of different things. And it's just a sheer grind. Of course, it's physically tough, but beneath a Vietnamese sun, if you're in triple canopy jungle, that is jungle vegetation that's 3 layers thick. In 2017, when my colleague, Dr. Scott Vanderstoep, and I took some students to Vietnam, we actually went to an archaeological site where it just so happened that it had been an active combat site for American and Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War. And one of the Vietnamese archaeologists out there said, this is triple canopy jungle. I had read about triple canopy jungle. I had seen pictures of triple canopy jungle. But until you're standing beneath 3 layers of trees, 3 layers of tree vegetation so thick it blocks out the sun at midday, you can't appreciate the thickness of that kind of vegetation and then the sweltering heat that's trapped beneath it. All you can do is just sweat into a puddle. Private First Class Richard E. Marks, United States Marine Corps, wrote on December 12, 1965, Dear Mom, I'm writing this in the event that I am killed during my remaining tour of duty in Vietnam. First of all, I want to say that I am here as a result of my own desire. I'm here because I always wanted to be a Marine and because I always wanted to see combat. I don't like being over here, but I am doing a job that must be done. I am fighting an inevitable enemy that must be fought now or later. I am fighting to protect and maintain what I believe in and what I want to live in, a democratic society. If I am killed while carrying out this mission, I want no one to cry or mourn for me. I want people to hold their heads high and be proud for me for the job I did. This was the attitude. I think Private Marks he exemplifies the attitude that I think most Americans, most young people had at this point in the Vietnam War, well before Tet Offensive, January 1968. It was a job that they didn't want to do, a job that was tough to do, a job that was unpleasant, but they wanted to do it because they believed in the ideals of defending a constitutional democracy and a Republican democracy in America. This Marine, Dear Mom and Dad, the battle for Khe Sanh is not over yet. So now we're talking 1968. Tet Offensive has begun. Since it began, we, Bravo Company 3rd Recon Battalion, have lost 14 men killed in action and 44 men wounded in action. I've seen enough of war and its destruction. I am scarred by it, but not scared enough to quit. I am a Marine, and I hope to someday be a good one. It bothers me to think of these so-called Americans who shirk their responsibility to our country. If I ever get close enough to a peace picket, he would see part of the Vietnam War in my eyes. We have so little here, but we share all. Please pray for us. Please pray for us here at Khe Sanh. There you are, somebody who's there enduring a 77-day siege, clearly scared. The Marines of Vietnam, who were they? They were these kind of people, fighting for their lives, but still saying someday, I hope to be a good Marine, fulfilling what the Marine Corps mission has always been, what drill instructors tell them they should be, and still wondering, is he good enough? James Webb, who was a former Assistant Secretary of the Navy and also a senator from Virginia. He was also a Marine Corps platoon commander and a Silver Star winner. He's had a very, very illustrious career. And to give us another viewpoint of how the Vietnam War was, or another aspect of it, in his book, Fields of Fire, this is a novel, so therefore fiction. It's not like Caputo's memoir, which is based on fact, or the letters from Vietnam, which of course are just snippets of people's real letters to their home, to their loved ones. James Webb, the thing that caught me when I read this book many years ago was that there is a scene there where the senior staff sergeant of the platoon is about to go on leave. He's not going to re-enlist. After his 13-month tour is over, he's getting out. He's had enough of the politicians back in Washington preventing them from accomplishing the mission. All he wants to do is be given a mission and accomplish it. But there's one part of the book where the platoon commander is told, Lieutenant, nobody back home knows there's a war on. We're the only ones who know it. Everyone else is just living their lives like it's just peacetime, like we're not at war. If you've ever read The Bridges at Toko-Ri by James A. Michener, which is about the Korean War, there's a similar attitude running through that book as well. Americans were trying to wrap their minds around what does it mean to fight a limited war in the Cold War, when you can't go all out like you did against the Nazis, and you can't go all out like you did against the Japanese. You have to hit them here, pull back there, hit them here, pull back there, and there's constant political interference and second guessing at the higher echelons of command. Tet was a tactical failure for the Vietnamese in the field, so they didn't win that one. But although a tactical failure, it was a strategic victory. And if not a strategic victory, at least for the Americans, a strategic eye-opener, because from 1965, with the start of the troop buildup, until Tet Offensive, there had been this general feeling that we've been making progress, that the war was in the bag, that things were just around the corner, that victory's going to come. But Tet pulled the wool off of all that. Because if the enemy is that close to being defeated, if he's doing that poorly, if you have that much of an advantage, how could you possibly have a multi-pronged offensive like the Tet Offensive? It's a good question. It's a logical question. And in response to the question being asked, the one who was called America's newsman, Walter Cronkite, took a trip to Vietnam. Walter Cronkite was called the most trusted man in America. And if you read up on Walter Cronkite, his journalistic ethics, this is back during the days when people actually gave the news, not their opinions. Masked as news. So Walter Cronkite, being an excellent journalist, went to Vietnam to see for himself if what he was hearing, if the anti-war protesters, if there was any legs to their protest. He went there, he walked around, he interviewed people, he went to different fronts. He did his work. He was a journalist. He got into the thick of things. But then he came back to America and he gave this history-changing editorial one night. He said, "It seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past. To suggest we are on the edge of defeat is to yield to unreasonable pessimism. To say that we are mired in stalemate seems the only realistic yet unsatisfactory conclusion. In other words, we don't know what the end game is here. We're not winning, we're not losing, but we don't know what the mission is. What are we trying to accomplish? Protect the world, keep the world safe for democracy? That's great. But is this the way to do it? Because the body bags were going back home to Dover, Delaware. The Vietnamese were clearly not giving up. And Tet showed that they were willing to do a lot of things, including lose more of their own people, to accomplish their mission, which was reunification. So Walter Cronkite was saying, it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors. America's most trusted man is saying, we're not going to win this one. We have to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. To Americans of the World War II generation, that generation of Americans who had fought during World War II, had worn a uniform during World War II, Lyndon Johnson, Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, George H.W. Bush, that generation, to say that you're not going to win, to negotiate in any other way other than a complete victory, was to be interpreted as loss. Lyndon Johnson, I don't know if this can be verified, but so the legend goes that Lyndon Johnson, watching Walter Cronkite's editorial, once he heard it, he said, if I've lost Cronkite, I've lost Middle America. He needed America, particularly Middle America. Not the West Coast, not the East Coast, but Middle America, where so many of the young warriors, men and women came from that went to Vietnam still believing in the mission. They went there. If you've lost them, it's going to be real hard to fulfill your agenda for the Vietnam War. And Johnson was indeed in trouble. In fact, it's in March of 1968 that Lyndon Johnson goes on TV and announces that he is not going to run for office. He's not going to seek re-election. And even though he was in political trouble, even though his domestic program, the Great Society, the goal to end poverty and do a whole bunch of things, to build roads, bridges, and so many other things, he was doing that. That had collapsed because of Vietnam. He had become his own worst enemy. Vietnam took Lyndon Johnson's dream of outdoing FDR's activity, his alphabet soup during the Depression, and basically canned it. He decided that, he said, I will not waste another minute of your time or my time or taxpayers' dollars trying to run for office when the most urgent thing I have to do is find a way of stopping this war. And that's what he did. By 1975, 7 years after Tet, the situation was looking pretty dire. By 1975, President Nixon was in office. You see here the Marines, still in Vietnam, were now involved in an evacuation at the embassy in Saigon. There are pictures of people climbing over the wall of the American embassy in Saigon that show these Marines, because Marines are usually the ones guarding the embassies around the world. And there are Marines who are helping some people over and pushing some people back, helping some people get on the helicopters. The last Marine who will be in Vietnam is Master Sergeant John J. Valdez. And he tells a story about how standing on top of the embassy building in Saigon, they still didn't know if they were going to leave yet, and there was this sense of surrealness. Like, really, are we after all we've done, after being here so long, after all the sacrifice? Because by that point, people knew what the numbers were. We had lost well over 58,000 women and men. Are we really going to just leave? And what about all the equipment? Equipment that was being pushed over into the South China Sea. Were only tanks and trucks and weapons behind, knowing that the NVA, the communists, were just going to let them have that? The answer was yes. The situation was, it must have been like a nightmare for these guys, like a Twilight Zone experience for them. Master Sergeant Valdez was the last to evacuate. The Vietnam War was costly to the U.S. Marine Corps. From 1965 to 1975, nearly 500,000 Marines served in Southeast Asia. Of these, more than 13,000 were killed and 88,000 were wounded. Now, consider this. 500,000 Marines served in Southeast Asia. The Marine Corps is only about maybe 200,000 people on any given moment. And 500,000 people served in Southeast Asia during that 10-year period. Of these, more than 13,000 were killed and 88,000 wounded. Nearly a third of all American casualties sustained during the Vietnam War were United States Marines. I recently participated in a memorial program for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, where they did the performance of this particular ceremony. This is one of the most moving kind of tributes to American service women and men that I've seen. So the question for many people even today, was it worth it? We know how the Vietnam War turned out. And I talked to veterans who have different views on this. Some of them absolutely, some ambivalent, some absolutely not. Was it worth it? I come to understand that really depends upon the individual veteran. In the case of Second Lieutenant John P. Bobo, who lost his life at the Battle of Gatlin's Corner, he got the Medal of Honor, but I suspect his family probably would rather have had him than a medal. But to try and honor his memory, Lieutenant Bobo, there's a ship that was built and given and had his name put on it. This is from the United States Naval Logistics Service. It can't bring him back. And then there are the veterans who they'll walk around with the memory of their friends, I tell my students at Hope College all the time that when they see a veteran at the Vietnam Memorial Wall or a veteran wearing one of their hats saying Vietnam or Korea or World War II, whatever it is, Afghanistan, Iraq, I tell them, show some respect. Because once upon a time, that Vietnam veteran was 19 years old as well. And had dreams and ideas and energy and youth and hope. And they may still have all that. But then they were sent to fight a war that was a very difficult war, as some of those letters have shown us. And they came back to a country that was confused at best and ungrateful at worst. And then it took them a decade or two to finally figure out that they were grateful for the job that they had done. A country that basically celebrated the people that ran to Canada a lot faster than the ones that stayed here and did the job. I told them to remember that. I told the students once who were going down to the School of the Americas in Florida to protest against U.S. military and its militaristic practices in South America. They said, Professor Johnson, come with us, protest with us. I said, no, I'm not going, but you go. Well, if you're not going to, if we're going to go, why don't you guys? I said, no, I want you to go because as Americans, that's your First Amendment right to go down and protest. But I said, do me a favor. While you're down there protesting, just remember this. While you're protesting, just remember that there's some other 19-year-old kid walking a guard post along the 38th parallel in Korea buying you the right to do that. Because you protesting isn't free. Someone's paying the price for that. Just remember that. That's all I want you to do for me. Remember that your right to protest is being purchased by somebody else's sweat and maybe blood. Can you do that for me? They went away. I don't know what the answer is for you all. I grew up in the Philippines. I was a kid in the Philippines when the Vietnam War was going on. I was at Clark Air Force Base, so I was brought up in it, in the ethos and the ecosystem of Vietnam. My father did 2 tours, my uncle did 3 tours. And at Clark Air Force Base, we had people that were either coming from America to Vietnam or from Vietnam coming back to the States, or the world as they called it. You could not get away from Vietnam in the Philippines during that period. So it was the culture, it was the thing I grew up with. And for me, growing up with it, I always thought it was worth it. I've been to Vietnam with students in 2017 and 2019. Even though we have normalized relations and even though we have good relationship with the country, I never forget the 58,000 who gave their all. Have you all ever seen the bumper sticker that some gave all and all gave some, or some gave all? But I always come back to this. One of the reasons that I decided to join the Marine Corps is because of what the sacrifice that people made in Vietnam. And plus I wanted, quite frankly, something nobody would ever be able to take from me. This title of Marine. It cannot be inherited, nor can it ever be purchased. You and no one alive can buy it for any price. It is impossible to rent, and it cannot be lent. You alone and our own have earned it. With your sweat, blood, and lives, you own it forever, the title, United States Marine. I've said to myself, no matter what else I might fail at in life, no matter how miserably I might perform from this day forward, I'll always know this. I earned that. That once upon a time I was smart enough and good enough to do at least that. And that keeps me going sometimes. Thank you. Questions or comments? We have any Vietnam veterans here? What are a number? Thank you for your service.
Nothing has changed since then as far as how we engage our current situations in Afghanistan. Why do you think that is? You know, in those days, the bumper sticker, war is good business and that's your son, was on a lot of cars. A lot of songs obviously were written, a lot of money made off that time by guys that I don't want to get into that. That's not me. The guys that protested and that, a lot of songwriters, you know, made a lot of money. And there were songs that when they're played now are reminiscent of that era. Is it money driven that by those that have the money and those that have defense contracts to stay and engage the way they did in Afghanistan instead of winning. We already knew from Korea, we already knew from Vietnam that you can't fight and engage an enemy that way without going all out.
Right.
We actually found that in World War II. You either kick ass and take names, or you get your ass kicked and your name taken.
That's right. That's exactly right. And
Why-
I'm sure you all heard today that General Colin Powell
Yes.
passed away today, right? So one of the reasons why General Powell, when he was former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, when he was one of the senior chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Operation Desert Storm, Vietnam, the strategy in the first Gulf War, that strategy grew directly out of his experience in Vietnam and what you're talking about. He said, before Desert Storm started, his plan was, we are going to go in with overwhelming force. First off, we're going to identify the mission. We're going to know what we're going there to do. Then we're going to do it with overwhelming force, just like you pointed out. We're going to do it, accomplish the mission, then we're going to get out. There will be a specific date to get out. And that's why the Gulf War, so soon after Vietnam, 15, 16 years after Vietnam? Not that long. 1991. So we pull out in 1975. 15 years later, because a Vietnam veteran is leading that charge, we do things the right way. I personally worry about having chief executives, that is presidents, in office who never worn a uniform or never been in combat. Because it is far too easy to send other people's children to war. Way, way too easy. Now your question about is it just a matter of money and who has the money? First off, I think yes. And let me give you an example about how people have been suspecting that all the way back since World War I. America declares war on Germany on April 6, 1917. Now, Europe had already been at war for 2.5, 3 years by the time we did that. But of course, the Americans were upset about that because the Germans had been waging something called unrestricted submarine warfare. Woodrow Wilson told the Germans that you shouldn't be sinking our ships that were trying to sell weapons and supplies to the British to fight you. What's the matter with you? And the Germans said, you know what, we're many things but not stupid. But we declared war on the Germans, and then in the post-war world, meaning the 1920s, when the Great Depression finally happened, when people wanted to know how the economic cataclysm had fallen on America, they began asking questions. It's just kind of the question you kind of asked, and they went back to World War I, and it turned out that there was a book written called The Merchants of Death, which was just one of many studies that looked at this. That it was arms manufacturers, say it with me, arms manufacturers and banks quit bamboozled Wilson, so they thought. They couldn't verify it, but many people had to believe that it was the only people who benefited, even if they did not bamboozle him, the only people that benefited from all the blood and sweat from World War I had been the bankers and the arms manufacturers. People asked that same thing in World War II. They asked it in Korea, they asked it in Vietnam, they're asking it about Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's always been this suspicion that the only people who win are the ones who are making the money to train the people to kill each other. Or to train people to use the weapons and building the weapons that we use to kill each other. So I cannot verify that is the case, but your suspicion is not the first time, nor is it the only one. Yes, sir.
Eisenhower talking about the military-industrial complex.
We're having the comment up here is that one of the last things he did before leaving office, in fact, it was a televised speech. If you go, you should go on YouTube. I really recommend. Thank you. That's very good. Go on YouTube and watch Eisenhower's speech warning about the military-industrial complex, because he said that in a democracy you cannot have too much money or power accruing that is gathering in one sector, the defense sector. He said, because at some point, and he didn't say in the way, but because Eisenhower was many good things, but not unfortunately, he said, at some point, that gathering of money and power, at some point, the arms manufacturers, the military-industrial complex, as he called it, and it wasn't going to be built, it was already existing, he said. At some point, it will tip the scales to where their interests become more about making money than about protecting the country. And then when it becomes more about making money, they may decide to get involved in politics and bend the wheels of democracy to serve their needs versus the nation's needs. That was Dwight Eisenhower in 1959, 1960, before he left office. Many people wonder about the same thing today. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes, sir.
I just want to make a comment. I was part of the 1st Marine Brigade.
I'm going to ask you to take the mic so that the people in the back can hear.
I was battalion commander's driver for the artillery, 1st Marine Brigade when we landed in Vietnam. We went originally defense of the Seabees
Mhm.
as they built the airstrip. And I always remember just little things, was when I left, they flew us into El Toro in California.
Right, right.
And we were there a few days to get your orders and you can go home and go on leave. And they said, we'll give you this check, 'cause they used to have military standby, I don't know if they're still doing that on the airlines.
Mhm, yeah.
The half price thing.
Yeah,
We'll give you a check, you can show them where you don't have to wear your uniform. It's, well, why would we not want to wear a uniform? So they're protesting, we're going, who's protesting? We didn't, we had no clue that there were people out there that didn't like us being there, even in '66 when I left,
right.
they were starting. And-
So this is before Tet, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I got there, I made the initial landing when they had the main build-up.
What did you all land? You landed Da Nang?
No, July.
Okay, Chula,
We
okay.
made the initial landing at July,
Okay,
and that's where they built the airstrip and all that.
right.
And it went from there, because I was part of Operation Starlight. Didn't realize that until years later, reading it in a book, it was just another operation.
Yeah.
And, but I guess, I just irks me when I think, oh, these people out there could care less. We're out there doing, like you say, what we're doing for our country and guiding country core, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, I don't know, I've often thought, after all these years, it's still, I'm glad I went. I'd do it again in a heartbeat, go back.
Yeah,
They want somebody that's almost 80 years old.
yeah, yeah.
Might
Yeah.
be able to crawl off the ship or something, but, anyway, I just, it's a bunch of little things that you think about, that's different.
The thing I loved about Marine Corps boot camp, now, I grew up in the South, and it was right, it was at the end of the Civil Rights Movement, but there was still like the afterglow of it. And the day that I heard the drill instructor say, I don't care if you're white, black, polka dot, green, you're all equally worthless to me, and I said, finally. Equality. Other questions, comments from the Vietnam veterans?
Any of our Zoom people, if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please do as well.
That's interesting that people were protesting in '66
Yeah.
when you got back.
That's what they gave us that.
Yeah,
That
that
chit,
shit, yeah. That's too bad.
That was
I hope we're
LA
doing it better.
Airport.
Where? El
LA
Toro?
Airport.
Yeah, LA Airport.
Yeah,
Yep.
they suck.
Anyone else have a question or a comment? I'll gladly give you the mic. And that's just so that everybody else in the room can hear.
The afterglow of the civil rights movement, I never heard described that way before.
Yes. It's always a better way than saying I missed it. Anyone else? I think about Vietnam veterans. Yes, sir.
I was in the infantry in Way City during Tet, and you can say a lot of things about us, but you can't say we don't have heart.
Yeah.
I know a lot of dead Marines who did things that are unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading some reports. I wish I could have remembered that before I came up here, but some Marines who are still getting, some Marine, 83 years old, finally got his Medal of Honor maybe about 3 years ago. They're looking, these stories are coming out, and they're saying, we're overdue, sorry about it, but at least they're trying to do the right thing for these guys who want to meet their maker. And you're absolutely right. I just can't, the stories that my drill instructors told us going through OCS and at the basic school about what Marines did in close combat in Vietnam. And some of them were Korean War veterans. There's a story about Lieutenant Valdemaro Lopez, who in the first wave at Incheon, and Incheon was one of those landing ports where the port facilities were so poorly constructed. The reason why nobody wanted General MacArthur to land there was because they had erratic tidal movements. You can't predict the tides. There was channelization. You were bound to be a sitting duck in a landing craft going through those channelized areas. But everything that made it a terrible landing site is why MacArthur picked it, because he said the North Koreans know that too. They won't expect us to land there. So they went, and it was a successful landing. But Lieutenant Baldomero Lopez, speaking of heart, went up in the first wave, and they had to climb up on ladders from the landing craft. Now, if you made an amphibious landing, you already know it's already difficult enough when the thing's moving back and forth, the wave motion, trying to get off and on that thing, and put a ladder on it too. Climbed up and ran insane toward a bunker. So to throw a grenade into the bunker, got hit with machine gun fire. The grenade rolled close to his men. He dived on it and absorbed the blast. That kind of stuff happens all the time that Marines do for each other. Because, you know, if you've never watched the movie Black Hawk Down, that's about the Army, but it's about Marines too. The theme about that, which we were taught in OCS, leave no one behind. Leave no one behind. And sometimes our enemies, they use that as our weakness. They know that we're not going to leave anybody behind, so they will wound someone and wait for us to go back and get them so they can get more. That's not their ethos. That's not what they do. That's what we do, though. And I tell my students that I'm not leaving anyone behind unless they want to be left behind. So that has infused what I do and what I've done in the private sector, teaching everything else. Thank you. I'll bet you. A lot of heart. What else?
Well, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. We appreciate whether or not you visited with us on Zoom or in person. And we look forward to seeing you for the rest of our series. Next week it'll be the Navy in Vietnam. And our speaker will be zooming into the theater. And as those of you that have come to the previous ones, it's not as great as having Fred in the room with us, but it is still a great option for having one-on-one communication. But feel free, if you don't want to come out that night, just get the link from us and you can zoom into it as well. Tonight we have about, the only one you see up there right now is Cliff, but we have about 12 people on our Zoom call as well. And I didn't want to take up half the screen with all the people. So we just have Cliff up there right now.
Thank you all for coming out this evening. It's so good seeing people face to face. It truly is. I live with a French bulldog, and I've been talking to trees and tires, so it's good to see you.